All right. So good afternoon, dear colleagues. My name is Maya Sigua, and I'll be moderating today's roundtable sessions, Ukraine and Georgia, Common Past, Common Future, Together Back to Europe. Since the end of February 2021, the world is radically changing. Russia's brutal aggression on Ukraine made many to revise their opinion, bringing many in Europe closer to each other. Ukraine stands and fights not only for its own territorial integrity, freedom, sovereignty, and democracy, the best European values, but also for everyone who share those values. Military aggression is not something new for Russia's neighbors. Both Ukraine and Georgia recollect centuries of oppression and at the same time look the future in bright colors as part of the European family, as it is also indicated in the description of today's event. The music industry is no exception. We all remember since the very first days of war, not only defending gun sounds, but also sounds of music could be heard from Ukraine. And this is also very familiar for us, Georgian. And now it's my honor to introduce the joint roundtable discussion sessions featuring academics from Kharkiv, Kotlyarsky University, University of Arts, and Saradishvili Tbilisi State Conservatorium, excuse me. And the event is dedicated to the European perspectives of our nations. But before I introduce the first speech, I'd like to do two very wonderful things. To express my gratitude to those who initiated this meeting, the Vice Rector for Research and Pedagogical Work and International Relationship, Mr. Oleksandr Primenko, and the Head of International Relations Department of Tbilisi State Conservatoire, Ivedika Gainadze. And I would also ask to the Vice Rector of Kharkiv University, Irina Soplenko, and the Rector of Tbilisi State Conservatoire, Nana Sharikadze, to tell us some opening words. Thank you, and Professor Soplenko, we are listening to you.
Thank you very much. I very excuse me. I'm very Katya, please help me.
Excited.
Excited. Excuse me, my English is not very well. I'm very excited to meet all of us.
Sorry, you're muted.
Internet, no.
Now it's okay.
And now for people who live in Ukraine, in Kharkov, it's very important have friends in other countries, and for us very important understand that we go on future right now. Neither war, neither Russia, neither very big problem in our town, not important for us. For us, important our future, our students, our friends. And so thank you for today and good work today.
Thank you very much. And Professor Nana Sharikadze is also here.
Thank you, Maya. First of all, I would like to express my warm support to Ukraine and my colleagues and students in Ukraine. We Georgians know well what you are going through now, because 14 years ago, Georgia went through the same circumstances, and you know that 20% of our territory is still occupied by Russia, and they still keep the checkpoints in 25 kilometers from Tbilisi, and that's a reality, unfortunate reality. The topic Together to Europe is as relevant as ever and as never, because actually Together to Europe for me personally means the order we have in our lives, the environment that we share with our friends, and what's most important for me, these are the values. So Europe is for me value, that gives me possibility to have a common language, common ground where I can communicate with absolutely different people, even unknown for me, but I communicate with them and I know that they will understand it because we have common things to talk about. If I don't have common things to communicate, I can't make projects with those who are not against war and are not against violence, and who still think that there is only one history written by Big Brother, then it's not fair for me, actually. I think this is a great time for crisis, and I think that in these kind of times, all people who experience turbulence, they go to the space and to the environment where strong values are presented. And Europe and European education, for me, is the pillar on which such countries like Ukraine or Georgia should build their future. And I think that we will succeed in this. So just crossing fingers for that. And I'll just end my very brief speech in Ukrainian. Все будет добре.
Thank you very much to the rector of Tbilisi State Conservatory, Professor Nana Shalikadze. And now it's time to start our roundtable program at ET, and it will be opened by Polina Kordovska and Alexander Lisichko. With the name of title of their speech is "The Sounds of War. It Should Never Reoccur." Thank you, and Polina and Alexander.
Maya, sorry, in a couple of minutes I have to leave because I have also meetings scheduled. So yeah. I just want to apologize in front of my colleagues and say that I will see this video by the end, but I can't just postpone my meetings.
Sure. Yeah, okay, thank you, Professor Shakat. And Polina and Alexander, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. We are really glad to be here. Thank you very much for this opportunity. So greetings, dear friends, and today we will discuss how exactly such horrible thing as war can be reflected in arts and particularly in music. Generally, we imagine music as something beautiful and harmonic, but that is not the case today. The talk on sounds of war can be started with symphonic frescoes by Leonid Hrabovsky, written in 1961. Grabowski is one of the founders of a group dubbed Kiev Avant-Garde, and it took a lot of courage to be in this group, since this group and its members neglected socrealism, the main method which was instituted by the Soviet government. But in symphonic frescoes, Grabowski showed great flexibility of mind, combining anti-war motives with malediction to all totalitarian regimes. Symphonic frescoes were written in 1961 by the motifs of the paintings by Boris Prorokov, titled "It Must Not Reoccur," and this explains the genre, frescoes. Respectively, each from 7 movements incarnates the image of a certain fresco, while symphonic frescoes open with a movement named the author's foreword. In this foreword, a motto sounds that was said all over the world after World War II: never again. It can be heard in imperative intonations of the brass, while the horror of the past is represented by the clashing sonorities. In the next movement, Grabowski maintains balance between picturesque reflection of the events with music and portrayal of emotional response to these horrendous images. For instance, in the second movement, which has so painfully familiar for all of us named Air Siren, the composer does not imitate the sounds of sirens. Instead, he creates the atmosphere of impending doom through muffled passages of the woodwinds. In the third movement, Air Raid, one can easily hear explosions of the bombs. Next slide, please. Apart from this obvious association, Grabowski portrays primitive and destructive essence of the air raid with a horrible march, which is played in sevenths. The fourth movement, In the Ruins, becomes a stark contrast with the former one, as it shows the buildings that people left, destroyed districts and cracks, as if some house just collapsed right before our eyes. The fifth movement incarnates eternal image of a mother, because whatever happens, the mother lulls her child and sings a lullaby, but everything in this lullaby is ominous. Intonations, accompanying chords, the choice of timbres. In the penultimate movement, Hiroshima, the composer allows us to see through sounds of a horrendous outcome of the nuclear bomb, the absence of life and inhumane drills or screechings of the violence, or one can hear even the Geiger counter crackle. And the final movement, A Curse to the Torturers. Next slide, please, Polina. Yeah, thank you very much. Is a culmination of symphonic frescoes, an expressive dialogue between two orchestral groups. Obviously, in the 60s, Hrabowski couldn't have imagined how relevant nowadays will be exposure of such cruelty. But having spoken to those who survived the Red Terror, the composer understood that horrible times might wait for Ukraine, and he cursed both the gods of Nazi concentration camps, and as in the official interpretation of this music, and all the structures akin to KGB. And it is exactly the same malediction Ukrainians send every time Russian missiles or bomb explodes in our cities. And if you want to, you can listen to these symphonic frescoes by scanning the QR code you can see now. And here's Polina to talk to you about how do Ukrainians respond to the war nowadays.
Thank you, Alexander. Really, it should have never occurred, but it has occurred. A terrible war has come to Ukraine again. Thousands of people died. Entire cities are destroyed. The lives of millions of refugees will never be the same anymore. But even in such circumstances, Ukrainian musicians fight their strength to fight the evil on the art front, to prove that when the guns roar, Ukrainian muses are not silent. Forced to stay in the heart of warfare, musicians play concerts in shelters to console the people who take refuge there. Those who were forced to become refugees organize concerts in support of Ukraine all over the world. Ukrainian composers also do not remain silent. There are already several music works created by Ukrainian composers since the 24th of February, in which they have expressed their pain and anger. First of all, I should mention an instrumental Lacrimosa by Alexander Shetinsky, which was created under missile strikes in Kiev, and the Grad opera, The Art of War by Serhiy Vilka. The last one was firstly performed by Nova Opera Group and Set Contra Ensemble on the 7th of April in Lviv Organ Hall. This performance was the first one I had visited since my being in Lviv as a forced refugee from Kharkiv, and the first war piece I had to comprehend. Symphonic frescoes by Hrabowski could be perceived as a certain reflection, a look back at the past events. The Art of War by Serhiy Vilka today is perceived in a different way. Someday, we will have time for the same reflections of nowadays. Someday, we will be able to talk about music pieces created during this war in the objective and reasonable way, as scholars should do. Currently, it is useless to hope for detached objectivity because of too strong emotional reaction. The genre definition of opera, The Art of War, is a painfully witty play on words, a combination of a grand opera genre and a name of Soviet and Russian Grad multiple rocket launcher system. Until the start of large-scale Russian-Ukrainian war, the opera libretto, based on an ancient Chinese military treatise by a famous strategist Sun Tzu, and a synthesis of various modern vocal and instrumental techniques, would have been alleged as just an attractive field for musicological discussion. But now, it is still too painful for dispassionate analysis. The aphorisms of the Chinese strategists, which acquired a new meaning with the beginning of the war, in the libretto of the opera, were intertwined with the heartbeat transcript of 5 non-personified characters, 4 men and a woman, who are hiding together from Shelling, saying the mantra, "Don't come here, enemy, don't come."
Не ходи сюди, вороже, не ходи, ми знаємо наші буркани і бурми. Не ходи сюди, вороже, не ходи, ми знаємо наші моря і струки. Не ходи сюди, вороже, не ходи, ми знаємо наші шахти і вали. Не ходи сюди, вороже, не ходи, ми знаємо наші вулиці і двори. Не ходи сюди, вороже, не ходи, ми знаємо наші пущі і сади. Не ходи сюди, вороже, не ходи, ми знаємо наші села і хутори. Не ходи сюди, вороже, не ходи, ми бачимо тебе з землі і згори. Ми чуємо тебе з води, краще не говори. Не ходи сюди, вороже, не ходи.
Тут наша земля, тут наші герби.
The audience do not know who are the characters of the opera. What is the relationship between them? The laconic space of the stage where they are locked is riddled with a heavy wooden bench, a symbol of endless waiting, and a portal to 3 wartime shrines: the bomb shelter, the train station, and the church. These 5 characters embody 5 unknown, never told stories of human life. The war put these stories on hold, gathering their heroes in a wrapped space-time, in which even simple city names word chain game gradually turns into a creepy torture of hope, despair, reproach, and foreboding.
Токмак.
Короб.
Перекоп.
Петрівці.
Ізюм. Мелітополь.
Лютіш.
Роздол.
Лемеші. І Івано-Франківськ.
Козача Лопань.
Енергодар.
Росоші. Іловайськ.
Кроловець.
Атманай.
Євсу. Генічеськ.
Керч.
Вишгород.
Дніпро. Охтирка.
Андросин.
Явір. Ява.
Вилитищиме.
Любець.
Чорнобиль.
Липці.
Ірпінь. Новопілич.
Ірвіно.
Олевський. Барвінець. Харків.
Буча.
Москва.
The war taught us the art of constant, careful listening. The sound canvas of the opera consists on distant, unidentified whistles and roars, which are perceived as danger on a subconscious level. Words spoken in shouts and whispers, broken vocal parts, repetition of one pitch as a countdown of condensed time, and of course the wailing of the A-rate sirens.
Дороги, якими не треба пересувати. Порожі, мій, яким не треба дати.
But the composer opposed them a touching cello solo and the cathartic sounds of the organ, which give hope that life will go on despite of the terrible war.
Розкажи, розкажи, як з церкви подалі від Бога під пахви виносять Ісуса, як з сонця зривається трон і гатить у жовтого пуса, як тхнуть у вітринах торти, і як розкриваються стелі, як ти перед тим, як піти, перекриваєш папер каре.
At Kharkiv University of Arts, we have not been taught the art of war. But this war posed many questions to us, which in one moment ceased to be rhetorical. To live or not to live, to cry or not to cry, to hide or not to hide, to forgive or not to forgive. Each of us has to look for own answer, and only one question, to be or not to be, is not a subject of discussion at all. Music teaches us that we have to relearn the main theme, the art of living, for the sake of our future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Pauline and Alexander, for the very touching and very for share with us with this very powerful and strong memorial of or example of how art responses on things like war, and how the war challenges it, and how, as I said, war responses on it. I am sure that our participants will have plenty of questions about that, and get ready for that. And another aspect is how you said that music of freedom, right? And sometimes this must be taught sometimes. And now we are another participant from Tbilisi State Conservatoire, pianist and associated professor Nino Zvania, who will speak about the other challenges that situation faces in front of music, challenges of teaching music in post-Soviet era. You have to excuse me because really it was very emotional for me as well. So Nino, please.
Thank you, Maya, and it was very emotional for me too. And although I will not speak about war, I want to express my respect and my gratitude towards Ukrainian people who are fighting not only their war, but our war too nowadays. And we think about you every day. Really, we do. So thank you very much. Now I will talk about some challenges that we face while teaching music in the post-Soviet era. I don't have any presentation, so I will just talk. All meaning we know depend on the key of interpretation, writes George Eliot in Daniel Deronda. The sentence I got acquainted with about 10 years ago has not only changed my worldview, but also my attitude to the art of music performance, research, and teaching. Finding keys of interpretation has become the main task of my professional life, as well as life generally. Consequently, I do believe that the most important duty of a teacher is to teach students how to find those keys. First and foremost, the right keys. What is right and what is wrong? Having supervised students in various courses, be it piano, new music ensemble, writing master thesis and doctoral dissertation, contemporary piano performance, for over 15 years, I'm still unsure whether we can talk about right and wrong interpretation of music. We live in the epoch of historically informed performance when interpretations of some great names of the past have been off question. At the same time, Willem de Kooning said once, answering to the question which painter of the past influenced him the most, "The past does not influence me, I influence it." And that is true. Stockhausen does influence Beethoven. Having performed and heard Brahms, Schoenberg, Cage, Reich, Stockhausen, we both intentionally and unintentionally bring those experiences into our interpretation of the great German composer. So what can I teach? How to sort problems out and how to solve them, how to practice, how to analyze, how to research, how to obtain the foundational knowledge, how to become independent step by step, and eventually how to find own key of interpretation, persuasive for oneself and more or less acceptable for others. Any student has to learn that. Any teacher has to supervise him, her on this interesting and challenging way. I had a wonderful teacher in piano at Tbilisi State Conservatoire. Professor Nana Khubutia raised all of her students as independent musicians, encouraging them to think critically. She supervised us in individual ways, always taking into consideration our personal traits, abilities, skills, and interests. She always motivated us to offer our ideas and views on interpretation, and thus to become free-thinking professional musicians. At the same time, she was quite strict, demanding the high-quality performance of any task, and we always knew there is no alternative to highly disciplined practice. That's why we all differed from each other in performance styles. Many classes of some famous professors in Georgia and post-Soviet countries lacked and still lack this feature. Today, one would define her approach as a student-centered one, while the Soviet music education and Soviet education generally was rather teacher-oriented, with all respect to some great teachers that Russian and Soviet piano schools are based on. Thus, my approach to teaching is grounded on Professor Khobutia's ideas. All general rules, methods must be adjusted to an individual student, and the student should be encouraged to develop critical thinking skills. She should be able to question even the most sacred dogmas of the music world. I learned how to avoid dogmatism not only from my teacher. I have specific interest for contemporary art music, and this interest influenced my approach to performing and teaching as well. As a rule, I have to play pieces that are free of any performance traditions, and I have to literally discover them for myself and for listeners, relying mostly on scores. It is performance traditions that quite often impose specific burdens on us, performance when we have to interpret music of the past. Traditions sometimes tend to transform themselves into cliches that determine the art of performance in the educational system. At music competitions, concerts, and etc. These cliches are part of professional life of any musician, and as a teacher, I have to prepare my students for that life, especially taking into consideration the fact that some traditions are very valuable and important. However, I think step by step, students have to learn how to create their own interpretations, how to discover pieces by themselves, and my duty is to teach them how to do that in a highly professional way. How to teach a student critical thinking skills. I believe, first of all, they have to learn to evaluate themselves. At first lessons with my students in piano class, they mostly get confused when I ask them to analyze their performance, to assess their strengths and weaknesses. Coming from music schools and being highly dependent on opinions on their teachers, they find it extremely complicated to switch to another mode of learning. However, step by step, they learn how to evaluate themselves, define the problems, and eventually solve them. At the same time, they learn how to formulate the tasks they have to undertake to solve those problems. It is this ability that helps them later to express and justify their opinions when they work as teachers, ensemble members, accompanists, obliged to discuss problems of interpretation with students and colleagues. I also encourage my students to argue with me over my recommendations and advices if they do not agree with me. However, their argument should be consistent and justified. At MA level, I even encourage some students of my piano class to prepare short pieces completely independently and present them at concerts. I do believe that in order to survive in contemporary music world full of famous stars, prize winners, and stereotypes, the musician has to have something that makes him unique and valuable. If we cultivate in our students freedom of thought, supply them with profound knowledge in the related fields, teach them how to use this knowledge and how to develop further, we will give them the opportunity to find their own place in a diverse world of music. In 2010, I participated in Junior Fellowship Development Program that enabled me to stay for one semester at New England Conservatory and to observe their classes. It was while observing classes when I realized how democracy works in educational system. That was one of the most striking experiences of my professional life. I was born in an authoritarian country, the Soviet Union, with authoritarian educational system. It was not only teacher-centered, but also oriented on children and students of distinguished abilities. This was and still is especially typical for music education that aims to discover and raise stars, employing strict discipline. There are many cliches about being successful in music in all post-Soviet states. Due to those cliches, students that do not have specific abilities, such as excellent memory, nervous system stability, artistic personality, exceptional technical skills, are not considered appropriate for musical education and career. The most important idea of cooperative learning approach I got acquainted while being in the US is that students working in small teams, each with participants of different levels of ability, use various learning activities and achieve more than students put in individualistic or competitive learning settings. Having generalized this idea, I realized that music education system of post-Soviet countries just does not encourage students of various abilities who could contribute to development of music in different ways, thus discovering particular abilities and talents of students and developing them became the main purpose of my teaching, especially teaching piano. Working with students for several years gives me time to identify their strengths, develop them, and help students to reach their potential by directing their interest in particular directions, be it concert performance, collaborative piano, artistic research, or pedagogy. We all are affected by our professions. Teachers make quite an interesting case in this respect. Having taught for years, we usually forget that we have to learn from time to time in order to be able to teach further. That's why I always try to go back to the position of a student. Various scholarships I got and programs I participated in as a teacher allowed me to observe classes in the US and Germany. Within those programs, not only have I learned from my American and German colleagues how to design and hold courses, how to assess students, but also have experienced student life doing students' homework on my own initiative. I wanted to make myself fully acquainted with subjects I'm particularly interested in, and to look at the educational system from students' point of view. I'm especially thankful to orientation courses and summer schools preparing me for my stays in the US, as they introduced to me the most recent and important achievements of the field of general pedagogy. Applying some principles of general pedagogy to musical one have definitely contributed to my professional development as a teacher. I do believe that the primary task of supervisor, teacher, is to help a student to finish particular, let's say, project in time, and to support him, her, to become an independent and critically thinking musician or researcher. The most important challenge is to keep balance between independence and guidance. As a supervisor, I do provide my students with feedback about their development, and this feedback is not and should not always be positive. But I have never had any problems with negative feedback, as students always know and feel that it is crucially important for their progress, and I consciously act in their best interest. In this regard, it's very helpful that my relationship to my student is intentionally personalized. As an active piano teacher, even in thesis writing, I prefer live sessions over online consultations, though pandemic forces us to employ online lessons actively. Meeting in person and live discussions, in my opinion, always help much better to evaluate the real situation, especially when it comes to specific problems to be overcome, such as writer's block, definitely difficulty with finishing the thesis, issues of time management, stress, and etc. Quite often, particular problems are caused by difficulties in other fields of life. I believe that my role is not only to share with students my knowledge and professional experience, but also to give advice on how to overcome the difficulties mentioned above, relying on my own life experience. One of the biggest shocks of my life was to see the fencing construct of New York University's Bob's Library, erected against 12 stocks of books and journals to prevent stressed and tired students from jumping down and committing suicide. The library has been the site of several deaths in 2003. At the same time, I'm aware of the fact that personalized relationship between a supervisor and student should never be too intimate. We have to teach them to solve all kinds of problems independently. So what can I say about reaction of my students? Actually, I have developed this attitude to my teaching, being the product of post-Soviet era who has traveled a lot abroad. So it's always interesting to know what my students think about that. So my students often tell me that the most important elements that support them during their studies is freedom that I offer them. They always feel free to express their ideas that motivate them to search for them. I'm happy to say that they have never misused my openness, but I'm aware of a possibility of such cases, and I'm ready to handle them. The golden rule I learned at one of the forums organized for supervisors is supervision must be personalized but not intimate. I always follow it, and it helps me to avoid complicated situations. As for my rather democratic attitude, which is not very typical for Soviet school, it's like any personal trait. It can turn into disadvantage, and I'm aware of this too. That is why I'm very careful while motivating my students to find their own keys of interpretation. I always insist that the process of searching is based on foundational knowledge of a subject, and I know that I always have to develop the skills to provide them with this knowledge. Maybe that's the golden ratio we're searching for. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nino, for this really very interesting topics that also can raise lots of questions. I already have some. But now it's turn of our another speaker. It's Natalia Shapovalova, who is actress and director and teacher at Kharkiv National Art Academy, and she'll be talking about the European context of the development of theater education. It's another variety of education in Ukraine, experience and challenges. Natalia, please.
Good day. Theater education in Ukraine has more than 100 years of history. Today, professional training in the field of performing arts is provided by institutions like of the third for accreditation, universities, academies, and institutes, so institutions of the second accreditation colleges. The geographical location is wide. It's Kyiv, Kharkiv, Lviv, Rivne, Ternopil, Zaporizhia, Odessa, Dnipro, and other regional centers. Currently, most art educational institutions focus on the European cultural layer, but I want to focus today my topic on the experience of the Kharkiv Kotlyarevsky University of Arts as one of the first educational institutions that start this movement in Ukraine. Kharkiv Kotlyarevsky State Institute of Arts was founded in 1963, but the beginning of theater education in Kharkiv dates back to 1923. I would like to point out that even when the formation of educational programs took place under the influence of European theater education, because the teachers of professional disciplines were mainly actors and students of Les Kurbas, who in their methodology were able to combine the Ukrainian theatrical avant-garde and the achievements of world culture. The modern composition of the theater faculty includes 4 departments: theater studies departments, acting and stage directing department, department of animation, theater, acting and directing, stage speech department, and also have 2 student theaters. If we talk about the main directions of international activity today, in my opinion, they can be divided into 4 main groups, both for students and teachers. There are festivals, cultural exchange workshops and cooperation projects for students, internship and trainings for teachers, and research activities. It's important to note that the movement towards European integration and the presentation of Ukrainian culture in Europe didn't start now and not even in 2014. It began when, in fact, such a program didn't have an active support at the state level yet. For example, back in 2002, the Department of Animation, Theater, Acting and Directing became a partner of the Alexander Zerverovich National Academy of Dramatic Art and in Warsaw, branch in Białystok, and participated in their first festival of puppetry schools, Puppet No Puppet, in which continue to participate to these days. The Kharkiv Theatre School has always embodied a combination of tradition and the search of new forms. Therefore, it fits into the European context with its understanding of the ways of development of modern art. This year's work was also an example of such combination. At the festival Puppet No Puppet, our students presented 2 performances, Spectacle in directing Oksana Dmitrieva and the project Anima Art for Peace. It was the project which was born during the war and consists of creative works of students of the Department of Animation, Theater, Acting and Directing. And this work is also aroused great interest in the methodology. An important step of international cooperation was the launch of the International Festival of Puppet Theaters and Other Forms of Scenic Animation, Anima. It was founded in 2004 as a biennale by Professor of the Department Alexander Nutuchkin and was a celebration of the best and brightest representatives of the European and world puppet theaters. Unfortunately, after 2008, due to a lack of financial support, it became impossible to hold the festival. But in 2018, the festival was revived and was supposed to take place in 2020, but coronavirus has prevented these plans, and we hope that after the war, the 5th edition of the festival will again gather the puppeteers of all the world in Kharkiv. If you talk about cultural exchange and master classes and workshop comparison projects for students, there have been many of them in all departments of our theater faculty over the past 10 years. Therefore, I will focus on the main and the most surviving ones, in my opinion. The first I will talk is the project Theater Window to Europe. One of the fundamental projects in this direction of international activity. The program was launched in 2011 by the Theater na Żukach and aims to introduce a modern European theater to the students at Ukrainian theater universities. Over the years, the program has reached several thousand students, teachers, and theater university and actors in Kharkiv, Kyiv, Lviv, Dnipro, Mykolaiv. All classes within the program are conducted by invited directors of European theaters in a practical form, trainings, master classes, which allows students to pass through new knowledge and gain completely new experience and skills. On the slide is only a few examples of this workshop. In 2021, the program continued with the project Theater Windows Work in Progress as part of the educational program Theater Window to Europe. As part of this project, it was also planned to bring directors from Poland, Germany, and France to Ukraine, who would present the schools of Grotowski, the instrumental actor, and Delarte's comedy. Unfortunately, it was possible to hold only 2 sessions of master classes, both at the base of our university. However, the students were so inspired by this collaboration and the resulting performances that I really hope that this program will continue to exist in peacetime. Also, 2 important European partners and theaters, it's Theater Brama from Poland and Wheels Theater from Germany. Cooperation with them also began with the project of Theater na Żukach, but has already grown into independent cooperations thanks to work of our teachers Maria Vaneva and Olga Krivosheeva. Their last cooperation was the Summer Theater Academy in last year. It was 6 weeks of trainings, lectures, and communication offline and online for Ukrainian and European youth. The central event of the project was the trip of Ukrainian group for 2 weeks to Poland to the partners, the Brama Theater from Poland. Also, the Department of Acting and Director of Animation Theater has a lot of international cooperations. Last of them, it was the workshops, online workshops with the students of Theater Academy from Wrocław. about traditional and innovative methods of educational process for actors of animation theater. If summarize this session, we can conclude that if earlier we were looking for partners in Europe for the project in order to in some way adopt their experience, now we can safely say that European partners have become interested in us with our experience and our view of art. We have proven our importance in the field of European culture with 20 years of experience, and now we can offer cooperation projects and set trends with our cultural vision. I would like very quickly to say a few words about very important programs. It's program Erasmus+. Our university became one of the first universities, art universities in Ukraine, which to participate in this program, and it's very interesting opportunity, like for teachers, like for students also. Artistic residency program. Now our teacher Alexander Nutochkin have this program in Alexander Zerverovich National Academy of Dramatic Arts in Warsaw branch in Białystok, and all this 4 months he have workshops in this university, and they organize creative being for our teacher. Scholarships. The main scholarship is Ministry of Culture and National Heritage of the Republic of Poland scholarship Gauda Polonia. For this scholarship was free opportunities in academy in Białystok and also in theater animation in Poznań. And research activities is also very wide represents for our teachers. It's conferences, open lectures, discussions, publications. For example, it's conferential Lalka Nova, New Meanings of Puppet in the Theater and Performing Arts was in Wrocław, Poland. And also Ukrainian Theater Now was an online conference, and Iceland. In 2018, the Department of Animation Theater have educational art residence Anima. It was a project for Ukrainian students and professional actors and directors from theaters with teachers from our university, and also with teachers from University from Białystok, Poland. Headliner of this meeting was Professor Marek Waszkiel, is very famous theatrical critic. There are also open lectures which provides by teachers of our faculty. Some of them was in Prague during this war. This was a lecture about Les Kurbas and puppet theater of contemporary Ukraine from teacher Yana Pertola and Olga Dorofeeva. And also we take part in discussions. Now it's a lot of discussion about situation in Ukraine, about theater situation, about contemporary Ukrainian art. So a lot of them there are in Czech Republic and Poland and London, a lot. And that's it. Thank you for your attention. Maybe some words, maybe some questions about our projects and our experience we will give. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, I'm sure about that. So let's wait to the other speakers until they end their speeches, and then I'm sure there will be plenty of questions to you. Thank you, Natalia, very much. And the next speakers are Yulia Nikolaevska and Katerina Lozenko. They will be talking about arts in Kharkiv at the beginning of the 20th century, from Europe to Europe.
Dear colleagues, thank you very much for the invitation to the roundtable discussion. The emphasis you put in your reports show how our connections are valuable at both parts. In our report, we, with my colleague Katerina Lozenko, we talk about the beginning of the 20th century in Kharkiv. Specifically about those innovation that were fostered here and allowed the maintain culture on a very high level. We would especially like to emphasize the Ukrainian-Georgian creative ties. There are not so many of them, but they are all significant and interesting. Katya. Katya. Where am I, Katya? So, but we're starting with our roots. We know our tradition. Many people can be mentioned, Katya.
Yeah, you're muted, sometimes unmuted.
Katya?
We can't hear you. Maybe you would remove your headphones and use computer sound.
Katya?
I muted Katya, I'm sorry, it was a strange sound.
Problems. But no, well, so message one. We know our tradition. Many people can be mentioned here, but the most important Grigori Skovroda. And now slide, please. Maybe, yeah. I can't help but remember this year we celebrate the 300th anniversary of the birth. And other, and next slide, please.
Could you please continue, and maybe Katya will be able to resolve her?
Without slides.
Oh, okay. Right. Another option is, I'm sorry, if you quickly resend it to me, I can share it for you.
Maybe I demonstrate.
Oh, yes,
You
sure.
demonstrate.
Oh, she's back. She's back.
It's terrible.
No problem.
Katya, maybe I demonstration. I took demonstration. One second.
Take your time, no problem.
Так, so. No, without.
I'm sorry, it's only
sorry.
part of your screen, not the. Could you please expand it? Yeah.
Maybe next speaker and we maybe correct this.
All right, all right. So the next speaker is Eka Chapashvili, the composer and also the associate professor of Tbilisi State Conservatoire. Eka will be talking about music and freedom, survived Georgian avant-garde composers from totalitarian Soviet period. Eka?
Yes, I'm here. Just I will share.
All right.
Okay. Can you see my presentation?
Yes. If you just expand
Just,
it.
just notice.
Yeah. Thank you. That's it.
I have to start from the beginning. Okay, so I would like to attract your attention to how the totalitarian Soviet government controlled culture and why it feared freedom of thought and speech. This is my thing. Freedom. The right to live is a freedom that is subjective reality, and it excludes restriction of the freedom of others. Here arises the diversity of harmony, which exists only when the agreement on subjective reality becomes universal and acceptable to all, with no dogma. Freedom is not a wild desire to doing something. It is rather a wish for the spiritual and physical harmony of the coexistence of many, a kind of utopia for human nature that is expressed through art. Art is the only free arena where creative force are democratically distributed. There is no strict control in art. It is voluntary, whether you follow any subjective opinion or not. The most democratic system of existence is still within art. Indeed, art sometimes falls into the clutches of totalitarian regimes. However, the field is still free from this system due to its ability to create an alternative reality and subjective forms of expression. Why totalitarian system is afraid of free art? The most dynamic phenomenon characteristic of human nature is violence. Why? Because man, following his own nature, creates a system that, despite various prohibitive laws, it still aimed at gaining power. What does a person use power for? For his well-being or ambition? An authoritarian system is formed, the most common forms of violence, oppression, and in case of disobedience, even destruction emerge. Yet art by its faction still maintains the freedom of thought expressed in an alternative reality. Art is a cleft in a dead end created by the system. Every closed system goes into crisis, and the form of modify and transform themselves. All the processes take place in the field of science and culture because a large part of thinking is field. That is why it was so important for totalitarian regimes to control art, education, especially. The Soviet Union during its existence went through two periods. Before the Second World War and after the Second World War. The first period of Lenin and Stalin can be defined as a terror machine, when their repressions and the communists killed erudite people. It was a period when even an anonymously sent letter where was written about someone that was an anti-communist, and the reaction of the government was very strict. Punishment without any protection in a court of law, shooting or hard labor in Siberia like Gulag. Evgeny Mikeladze, what about I want to mention? Thousands of scientists, writers, poets, musicians, and plain people were shot during the repression of the 1937 in the Soviet Union. For example, Evgeny Mikeladze, I won't remember this young, very talented Georgian conductor who became the victim of an anonymous letter. Communists decided to clean the Soviet space from the Western knowledge. The idea was to create Soviet consciousness, the birth of the Soviet man behind the Iron Curtain. Communists, Lenin and Stalin especially, realized that art and literature have always been and will continue to be an alternative chronicle, or rather a detector of potential innovations. Works of art tell us truth directly or metaphorically, as they are a true echo of the reality of the era in which the author lives and creates them. Because of this, they begin totalitarian control of art and literature. Second period, Cold War, can be defined as a machine of corruption that destroyed the Soviet Union in the 1990s. In this period, life was easier because there appeared new generations. Soviet man was born. Red intelligence who knew how to use the system for his aim. During this period, club psychology developed Some clans psychology developed, and people begin to use power in more covert ways. During this period, the Iron Curtain opened a little bit, and interest in Western art and European life in general awakened. The taste of the colorful life of the West entered into the gray Soviet life. However, interest in Western culture, the creation of original and free works of art were still equivalent to speaking out against the communist ideology, for which such artists were punished by the state and became victims of ridicule and ignorance by red elite. They were not given state resource to implement ideas and career opportunities. They were simply in the shadow and did not appear in the art space. Today, I would like to present Georgian composers, Natala Swanidze, Nodar Mamisashvili, and Mikhail Shugliashvili, who lived and worked in the Soviet Union and who did not give up creative freedom and educated a generation of composers who create in independent Georgia. Nodar Mamisashvili is the author of dozens of scientific papers and publications. Among many other scientific interests, to study the Georgian charts and ancient culture was one of the most important themes of Nodar Mamisashvili. Of course, Soviet reality forbade any religion, and Mamisashvili's idea connected with church music were realized only in independent Georgia. He was the first in the world who created an acoustic scheme for the resonance distribution of 9 church bells, according to which the bells were distributed in the birthplace space of the Holy Trinity Cathedral. We can listen a little bit the his music. And does it sound? No? Just I have to share sound, I think. What it. Now, please. Now?
Yes. This is chant by him. And now we can listen a little bit the sound of church, which he like reconstruct Georgian church sound.
Next composer, Natela Swanidze. To be a woman avant-garde composer was twice more difficult in the Soviet Union because it was believed that a female composer should write children's music. Natela Swanidze is the first Soviet composer who created, female composer, who created electronic music, wrote symphonic work in dodecaphonic composition technique, and used a prepared piano. Of course, her music wasn't often performed in Soviet Union. Now we can listen to quotation from his electronic music. Which is part of his or her oratory, Lamentations, one of the layer. And this oratory was performed in 10 years ago, I think, if I don't make mistake, and was created 70s. I think it's, and this is his cycle, piano piece. You can see Nina Joania performs. It's prepared piano. Okay, next composer, Mikhail Shugliashvili, was perceived by many as a Georgian Xenakis due to his constructivist approach, non-conforming and dismissive of the political boom of the Soviet era. He was known to public during his lifetime as an excellent pedagogue. Now I would like to present his Polychronia, which was also performed several years ago in Graz Festival. It was first performance of this piece, and he never listened to his music. And at last, it was impossible to get information behind the Iron Curtain, but draw out the sound of the epoch with the system of totalitarianism also is impossible. This is confirmed by the music of the above-mentioned Georgian composers. Thanks to them, who did not exchange the freedom of creativity for the comfort of life given to Soviet artists. Today, there is a Georgian school of composition with the traditions of modern musical thinking, which developed in parallel with Western musical culture. They created 20th century Georgian avant-garde music that went against the ideology of the Soviet system. They taught us the new generation of composers, the freedom of thought, and the expression of our ideas through our imagination, which is related to the innovative technique of composition. Thank you for attention.
Thank you very much, Ega, for reminding and talking to us with those really incredibly daring figures who dared to somehow go against the mainstream and leave the most important, in point of view of the Western art, oppuses, the very precious oppuses of Georgian compositional school. And now I hope Yulia and Katerina are already ready, and we listen to you meanwhile. Yeah, that's it.
Can you see the presentation?
Yeah, we all unmuted our voices. Could you please unmute yourself, Yulia? We have no voice.
Polina,
Yes, thank you.
Next slide, please. Next slide.
Wait a moment. Next one.
So in our report, we with Katya, we talk about the beginning of the 20th century in Kharkiv, specifically about the those innovation in the world fostered here and allowed the maintain culture a very light, a very high level. We would especially like to emphasize the Ukrainian-Georgian creative ties. There are not so many of them, but they are all significant and interesting.
That amazing, but it is worth starting with our roots. Message one: we know our traditions. Many people can be mentioned here, but the most important is Grigori Skovoroda. Next, Polina, please. I can't help but remember this year we celebrate the 300th anniversary of his birth. First of all, he was a traveling non-philosopher, but one who always returned to Ukraine from his travels in Europe, who professed the philosophy of Cordocentrism, that is, everything should come from the heart. And this is very important in understanding the Ukrainian mentality. Message two. If we talk about the themes that led European aspirations in Kharkiv, we cannot fail to mention the foundation of the university in 1805. The German traditions of education, German professors, theorists, and practitioners, high student as the first music teacher at the university, all these are the roots of professionalism. In the musical field, the founder of our musical education and culture in the 19th century, Ilya Slatin, the fifth slide, please, demonstrated, next one, yes, demonstrated such a European level. He was a really amazing person. It was he who organized the college and later the conservatory and suggested very important things. First, it so happened, and Slatin was watching this closely, that the best graduates or teachers of European conservatories came to Kharkiv. Next slide, please. For example, it concerns the following. Albert Bench, a student of Liszt, Hugo Heck, a pupil of the German school, Andrei Yuryan, a student of the Latvian school, Franz Kuchera of the Prague school, Schulz Evler studied under Manushka Tauzik, Federico Bugamelli, a student of Mascania, Brinkbock, graduated from the Amsterdam Conservatory, Kalamiris, the Conservatory of Vienna. Gorsky is a Pole by origin. Petr Yakimenko came from France as an already well-known composer because his compositions were performed in Paris and New York. The Kharkiv citizen Sergei Barkevich returned from Leipzig. That is, Kharkiv became a center of intersection of various musical traditions against the background of which it was composing its own. Secondly, such a brilliant selection of musicians, this was a certain tactic of Slatin, made it possible to train many high-class performers quite quickly, which made it possible to create an orchestra and give a full-fledged concert. Next slide, please. It is worth noting that public symphony concerts, historical concerts were held in Kharkiv. Every program featured the compositions from Bach, Handel, as well as contemporary compositions. Youth symphony concerts, the compositions of Rameau and Gluck and Beethoven, Haydn and Schubert were played there. Summer symphonic concerts, they were directed by Franz Kuchera, a very interesting way. He communicated with the audience and the audience voted for the best composition and it was performed by the orchestra. By the way, the overture to Wagner's opera Tannhäuser was most often played on request. One more feature should be emphasized here, and it was inherent in the musical culture of Kharkiv at the end of the 19th century, encyclopedism. Thus, for example, the Gorsky bench duet performed all the violin sonatas of Mozart and Beethoven. There were also concert lectures. They were conducted by Genica. In particular, the lectures of harpsichordists, the sonatas by Mozart, Beethoven, etc. Monographic concerts were very popular. Kharkiv critics found a rather high level of fastidiousness. In particular, Horowitz criticized the concert of the very popular Hoffman, and in the last review, he even wrote that everything was played in a hurry and the musician barely reached the finale. Julian?
So, and what did it lead to? First of all, it led to the opening of our conservatory in 1917, where many of the above-mentioned brilliant musicians continued to work, while laying the foundation of the performing arts of which we are still proud. Secondly, from Kharkiv, the paths of some musicians again led to Europe. Yes, it happened for various reasons, but we remember that Slatin's sons contributed to musical culture in Belgrade. Yakimenko, next slide. Next, Yakimenko went to France, Bartkevich to Vienna. Kalamiris founded a modern Greek professional school, Yurian a modern Latvian professional school. Gorsky returned to Poland. Joseph Schillinger, a student of Yakimenko and who became a well-known composition teacher in America, to whom Gershwin and Cage addressed. That's Kharkiv became the source from which rivers flowed in all directions of the world for many, many years. It was important to show this turbulent creative life of the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries and the European dimension, because it is such condition that significant Georgian-Ukrainian connection were formed. What are these conditions? So, first, next slide, please. Some of the prominent Kharkiv artists worked in Tiflis for a certain time. Thus, in Tiflis, a native of Kharkiv, Yakimenko, worked as a conductor at a music college. He was called a dreamer, and Tod Stravinsky was friends with Fleming and wrote wonderful piano, chamber, and vocal composition. His creativity is essentially worth of a separate report. Several years of activity of Konstantin Gorsky are connected with Tiflis too. It was there that he showed himself as a brilliant performer at violins. It was written that his playing moved people to tears, which was true. I know that a few years ago a competition was announced of the material of the Gorsky activities of the period in Tiflis, and what end of this competition I don't know. 2. Kharkiv became the premier city of composition related to the Caucasus. For example, the premiere of Caucasian sketches by Ippolitov Ivanov. Ippolitov Ivanov, well-known Tiflis person at that time, took place in Kharkov in 1896, only 2 years after they were written. And this is not only end. 3. One of the brilliant musicians one of the rectors of the Kharkiv Conservatory in 1919, Arseny Koreshenko. Next slide, please. Arseny Koreshenko recorded and studied the folklore of the Caucasus, was an organized and conductor of concert of Georgian music, wrote a section of Georgian songs that still need to be found. By the way, an unfortunate fact, in Russian encyclopedias, even where it is written that he died in Kharkiv in 1919, it is written that is the Russian Empire, the Russian Republic, and even the RSFSR. And this still need to be corrected, of course, as well as it's necessary to correct the oblivion of his composition. 4. If we go further, it is worth mentioning that at the beginning of the 1929, it was in Kharkov that Zakhary Polyashvili held 2 of the most successful concerts of Georgian music. A little later, the opera Absalom and Eteri was staged for the first time by a Georgian opera group in the Kharkiv Opera Theatre in 1931, and in the translation of the brilliant translator who is called the Ukrainian Homer Boris Ten. Much later, in 1971, in the production of the Stefan Turchak, a graduate of our university, the world-famous Madame Butterfly, Gisela Tsipola, performed in this opera. Another, no less famous opera, Daisy, was staged in 1938 in Kiev, but it was translated by Mykola Bazhan, one of the most famous translators and future poets who lived in Kharkiv, in the famous house of Ritter's House of the Word, or Budinok Slovo, in 1932-1934. it would be very interesting to find this translation, because the translator were an encyclopedized artist and languages experts. 5, next slide please. Was mentioned co-creation of the theater stage, in particular Les Urbas theater Berezil and Georgian artist. The theater was avant-garde. It should be remembered that at that time the ideology of domestic avant-garde Mykola Khmelyovy expected the thesis: get away from Moscow, let's orient of psychological Europe. Actually, it is clear why the theater Berezil took Dediani's play Tetnud to work. Before that, in 1930, the famous Georgian theaters toured with great success in Kharkiv in the premieres of the Berezil theater. And in July in 1931, the stage drama theater Berezil was one tour in Georgia as part of the Decade of Ukrainian Culture in Tbilisi, which continued the fruitful work. In the picture next year, in the picture, the impression of Roman Cherkashin, a participant of the tour, looks at the next picture. It's very important what we say. The requests from Ukraine were also recognized on the streets. And Les Urbas' comment, the brain of the theater, shows that the Georgian community not only expected the avant-garde ideas of Urbas, but also warmly supported them. The tours of Georgia as part of the Decade of Ukrainian Culture in Tbilisi in July 1931 became a real triumph for Les Urbas as a director and Berezil as a leading theater of Ukraine, as well as for the entire national theater art. And the very next year, namely on June 5, 1932, the premiere of the play Telnud by Dediani took place in Kharkiv. The performance, next slide please. Now, their performance became the first example of Georgian dramaturgy in the repertoire of the Ukrainian theater. In the performance of Telnud, the audience was impressed by the visual image of the Caucasus mountain created by Vadim Meller. The artist created several large, maybe next slide. The artist created several large landscape painting and in a dark color scheme, which echoed association with the work of the Georgian artist Niko Perasmani. So, if we summarize the thesis regarding the musical culture of Kharkiv at the beginning of the 20th century, which is presented in the title From Europe and to Europe, then is concentrated in several positions. Next slide, please. First, the openness of the city to other influence. 2. The openness to new things in art. 3. Professionalism of the European level, exactness toward themselves and the tour people. 4. Encyclopedism as a main feature of perspective of new and progressive art. Therefore, let us express our confidence of that Kharkiv was it and will remain such an artistic center, despite everything that is currently happening on its street with the arrival of Russian aggression. The main thing is that the artistic heart of Kharkiv and Ukraine beat in time with the whole world. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, really, for the very interesting presentation. I am sure that there are some other facts about Georgian-Ukrainian relationship, which I can add something at the times of discussion. And now the final speaker of our roundtable that somehow turned into the mini conference, I guess, is Guanzaru, who will be speaking about just a moment, a role of music in the process of returning to Europe. Guanza, please.
Maya?
You're here.
Can you see me?
Yes, and we can hear you too.
Okay, I'll start. So I want you to remember that former Prime Minister of Georgia, Zurabstevania, in Strasbourg in 1999, at Georgia's accession to the Council of Europe, he stated, "I'm Georgian and therefore I'm European." Today it's obvious most Georgians think of being European as a positive attribute, but at that time, the effect of these words can be compared with the explosion only, because the entire world had almost zero information about Georgians, as we were never presented by the Soviet Union as a country of absolutely different identity. So he spread two pieces of information at the same time. We're Georgians, and Georgians are part of European civilization. His words, equating being Georgian with being European, were intended to convey both a desire and a confirmation of the reality that the country wanted to be engaged in a political project of Euro-Atlantic integration. In a historic moment, Ukraine and Moldova have been granted candidate status, while Georgia has homework to do. The requirements of the European Commission clearly state that Georgia will receive candidate status if all state institutions will work properly, if supervision of all democratic processes will increase. Until we meet these requirements, we have the biggest trump card, Georgian music, which is one of the most important visit cards for demonstrating our European mentality. When the European mentality of Georgia is discussed, music and other arguments must also be mentioned. We're territorially a part of Europe. The Caucasus is not Asia. Proto-Georgians from Caucasus, representatives of the Caucasoid race, spread to Europe from here. Blumenbach, the founder of Russology, mentioned that the founders of the white race are Proto-Georgians who lived in the Caucasus. Also on the map of the first historian, Herodotus, father of history, which dates back to 430 BC, Caucasus, Georgia, is marked in the center of the world. Georgia deserves to return home to Europe because since ancient times, our statehood stood on the values that are dear to Europe. We were famous warriors, but the history of Georgia is a history of not of conquering, but only defensive wars. And it's important fact, the European Union also stands on these values as a guarantor of peace. European mentality and values were manifested almost at every stage of Georgian history. High level of literacy, democratic governance, ethnic and gender tolerance. Imagine we put up the woman as a king in 12th century, rarest case in history. And the cult of personality and individual uniqueness, so valuable for Europe, you can find in our ecclesiastic literature since 5th century, also rarest case. One more argument. Ever since the fall of Byzantium, after 5 empty centuries of Muslim invasion and then Russian expansion, we intensively sought passage to Europe. And one fact of primary importance, Georgia was always unable to develop culture and music when it was deprived of the links with Europe. Only in the periods when Georgia had access to European values, Georgia continued dynamic development. Yes, in the field of culture and music, we have only Western experience from the ancient times, the influence of Asian culture was only superficial because we had cultural political links with Antiquitas, Rome, Byzantium, Europe, and the grandiose arguments. Georgia is the oldest center of vocal polyphony, surrounded by monophonic singing cultures of neighboring countries. In the field of church polyphony, Georgia was a part of European culture because it was a member of the Christian unity from 4th century. That's why we have similarities with European medieval and Renaissance polyphony. There are a diversity of types of polyphony in Georgia as well as in European music. We are a country of first ecclesiastic polyphony. As for folk music, a specific technique of singing Kremanchali in Georgia is often compared to alpine yodeling. Sometimes Georgian songs where singers are divided in two groups singing in rotation. We can find analogies of multi-choir style for High Renaissance. Also, Georgian kings had a constant connection with Catholic missionaries who visited Georgia since the 10th century and enriched the country with European knowledge and also music. I'm very proud to remember that if Russian Emperor Peter I founded university in Russia in 18th century, Georgian educational centers of European kind after Caucasus BC were opened also in medieval times. It was Ikalto Academy, 10th century, Galati Academy, 12th century, with Byzantine system of education. This system we meet subsequently in Europe. When Russia had begun expansion of territories by activating the plan of assimilation of the Near East, and the turn of Georgia had come, Heraclius, the king of that time, king of European vision, knowing that Christianity was one step ahead to get closer to Europe, made a forced choice between bad and worst. In any case, Russia tended to invade Georgia. Heraclius patronized musicians because he knew that music is a universal language and the direct way to European integration. The 18th century is known among us as French Voltairianism. The interest of implement Europeism was obvious. At the time, an epicenter of cultural life in West Georgia was Dionysus Princeton that had direct connections with France and possessed a large library of European music scores. Also, Italian operas were staged here. In East Georgia, the center of European music was Sinandala Estate. One more noteworthy fact that links us to modern Europe. As you all know, Europe stands on multicultural environments. We already had it during many centuries in Tbilisi, where diversity of ethnics lived in peace and friendship, respected and enriched each other. One could hear Neapolitan, Armenian, Georgian, Asian songs here, dance Polonaise and Lezginka at the same time. This is the Georgian tiny experience of nowadays globalist world. The process of integration with European culture was facilitated by establishment of the first opera theater and first higher education institution, Tbilisi Conservatoire, in Transcaucasia. At the beginning of 20th century, independent Georgia became a center of modernism and avant-garde in Southeast Europe. After softening of Soviet regime, we have mastered the European new composing technologies. Warsaw Autumn turned out to be a turning point for mastering new techniques. Also, we had representatives of unofficial music that came closer to electronic sound, even in Soviet times. Contemporary Georgian composers tried to keep up with the level of European composers. The point is not that they use modern techniques. The technique is a tool. The most important that they have European vision and European world perception. This is evident. Conclusions. Our geographic location has become our problem because Russia is between us and Europe. Even though Georgia is situated at the crossroads, we tend to aspire toward Europe, always. For centuries, we defended a state of equilibrium, but we were never passive. And in this unfinished search for a place in Europe, we hope for our music because of the values that are dear to us as Europeans. We have invested in music since immemorial times, and it does not need to be translated. Georgia and Ukraine suffered the terrible consequences of Russian annexation, and today's war has brought us closer. And our weapon is force of music. Ukrainian composers and Georgian folk and hymnographers' heritage are the symbols of our identities. And I hope that will meet not only in Georgia or Ukraine, but in the nearest future, open the gateway of our common home, European Union, where our universal language will be its majesty, music. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kwanza. And this is the end. This is a wonderful ending of the speaking part, the part of the speeches of our today's event. And now I invite you all to sharing your ideas or ask questions or giving feedback. So you are all welcome for that. You'll start. Is anyone going to start?
So may I start, Maya?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. I have only one question to all my colleagues. First of all, I want to support Ukraine, and I want to tell you thanks for this conference and meeting. And my question is, after this war, what are you planning to change in the studying process? So consequences of this war in your studying process. This is my question.
Thank you.
Who is know this? And next year we maybe we'll start our process in online, and our program is not changed. I think this full program, but in online, and we hope the war is end.
Yeah, let's hope it will be ended until the beginning of the next semester. Yeah, are there any other?
Semester? No, next semester, maybe second semester.
Okay, let's just hope about the best.
So how you handle
also
the war? How you handle this situation? It's unbelievable. It's war, and you're just speaking about music.
They are fluent Ukrainian people.
We just don't have other choice. So.
Yeah,
I think we have changed our study already, because we didn't stop to produce, didn't stop to studies, and we understand now that life and art so very quickly. So we don't have time to produce like one performance for a year or 2 years like it was before the war. So I think in the future our art and our productions will be more quickly, more asks for social life. It will be more I don't know how it says, more ostro, if somebody to help me. How? Sharp. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
thank you. Is anyone else who also would like to answer Gwanza's question?
Maybe I can say something. As for me, I feel that we should be more open and try to have more meeting, more co-working with other country. And yes, this situation shows that art and music, it can't be without politics. And yes, it's a sharp term, sharp situation, and I think it will be reflect in piece of art in next, maybe not years, but decades, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Kwanza, would you like to add something?
No, I wanted to say thanks.
Yeah, it will. I agree with you, Katarina. Of course, it will be change some things for decades, and we already had a couple of examples in the presentation that Paulina and Alexander presented, especially the opera, which was particularly very interesting for me. It is something very powerful, and it's will be, after the war ends successfully for you, a very strong memorial for the year, for the times you have passed through. So if anyone would like to ask a question or give some feedback, and then I'll allow myself.
So
yeah, Eka. Yes,
I wish you that war finished as soon as possible. And I support you, of course, and all Georgia supports you and regrets what happens. So I'm proud of you because you have power to speak about the music and to take part. And I know that it's your offer. Also to meet and speak about our countries, our future. Thank you. It was very interesting presentations, and I hope that Europa also hear our voice at last.
Thank you, Eka.
Thank you.
Nino, I guess you would like to say
So
something.
yeah, I would also, I have no questions. I just wanted to express my admiration to especially Ukrainian participants of this mini conference for finding time in those very difficult times. You know, it doesn't matter how much we know them, sympathize with them, we still cannot feel what they feel right now. So the only thing that I personally can do, and I think we can do, is just feel for you and admire you and thank you. Thank you for serving your country and serving music, because music is also as important for all of us as our homelands. So thank you for serving both of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nino. Any more replicas?
One more. So I feel sadness and happiness at the same time. Sadness about war and happiness about our unity. So thank you again.
Yeah, by the way, speaking about unity, there was one speech dedicated to Georgian-Ukrainian relationships, and here is something I would like to add, very important for us. Thank you for raising this topic, because it really is very important, and it just pushed me to search something that I remembered. For example, there are a couple of things that are really important for us. For example, you mentioned Koreshenko, who is mentioned in the history of our opera and ballet theater as one of the honest and uncorrupted researcher of Caucasian folk music. And here is a quote of the Tbilisi opera historian Shelva Kashmadze, who emphasized that how, for example, Russian classical composers used Georgian folk music. For example, he mentions Glinka, that he Ruslan and Lyudmila, he used a couple of Georgian tunes, and Rubinstein in his Daemon used also the same. And he literally named the Georgian folk songs, which shame to me that I don't know, that several folk themes named by him were used by Rubinstein in his Demon. Also, what I would like to say is that there was a musical events in the middle of the 19th century, namely before founding opera and ballet theater, there was a manege theater where the troupe from Stavropol was staged some musical pieces, and the Caucasus, the newspaper Caucasus, which was an official imperial newspaper published in Georgia, had to emphasize that the most successful examples of musical performances in Tbilisi at the Manege Theater was actually Ukrainian musical performances, namely Natalka Poldavka, and then also he mentions, just a moment, he also mentioned the piece written by Kotlarevsky, by the way. I will just tell you, he doesn't mention who is a composer, but the author of the piece was Kotlarevsky.
Lysenko.
Maybe I will tell you the name of the piece. Natalka, of course, it's by Lysenko, but the other one, just give me the second, I will give you the name. Yeah, Moskal Cherivnik. He does not mention who was a composer, but I know that the Moskal Cherivnik is a play written by Kotlarevsky, right? And also he mentions Shelmenko Denshik, and he said that these were musical pieces that enjoyed the exceptional success among the Tbilisian opera viewers. And I also have to mention Viktor Dolidze, who studied music in Kiev. And Viktor Dolidze is the first generation of Georgian classical composers and the author of the hit of first Georgian operas, Cato and Coda, the first Georgian comic opera. So yeah, this connection really is the topic of the very wide research, maybe the joint research in the future. Yeah, that's what I would like to say. Any other? Sorry, I spoke so much. Any other comments or ideas?
I want to say a few words of I really thank you for this meeting. It was really interesting, and for those kind words that you say about us. It's really important to feel that we have friends, we have this we feel that that you with us. So I think everything will be good, and maybe it will a good start for working together for some interesting projects and something.
Yeah, can't agree more.
With pleasure.
Yes,
with great pleasure.
Thank you very much for avant-garde composers of presentation of avant-garde composers of Georgia. And I remember Gvanza presented new piano, Georgia new piano in our conference. It was very interesting, very interesting. I remember this any more time. Very interesting, and I hope we to see hope to see you with the next conference and project and any any
Live.
So thank you very much again. If there is, if anyone want to say something, please do. Yeah, please. Please,
thank
Polina.
you very much for your support. Thank you very much for your kind words, and thank you for this beautiful opportunity to share our experience and get your experience. You know, Ukraine pays a terrible price for our freedom and for changing our future, and we have to be different in future, and we have to be more open, we have to be more freedom, and I think we have to get an ability to catch every opportunity. And so thank you for this beautiful opportunity to be together with you today. Thank you.
Полина, the main, we must to be. to be, must,
yes,
to be.
Just to be, and no discussion.
Yeah, exactly. So to summarize all that, we are already in here 2 hours and more. I would like to thank you, especially our Ukrainian colleagues, to find courage and strength and eagerness to be here to represent us, with us, your new findings and ideas and researches. I am absolutely sure that this is just the first step in the very long path, and there will be many more other conferences and discussions in person in the very peaceful and prosper time. And of course we are with you, as well as you were with us when we were in trouble. So that's what friendship is, and that's what we have to keep going. Thank you again for your incredible, incredible works, that you still keep going, you still think about future, you still think about how to develop in future, how to be in future. Of course you will be. There is no doubt about it. So thank you again, and I'll say goodbye, just in hope to meet you very soon. Doesn't matter in person or online, still I hope for in person in any case. Thank you very much. Thank you all my colleagues from Tbilisi State University. Thank you everyone who initiated this and who made it happen. A big, big, big thank yous. It was an honor for me to moderate this conference.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.
Bye.
See you soon.
Hopefully so.
So plan another meeting in the next semester from the September.
Why not?
Next semester. Yeah.
Why not? Why not? Thanks to Maya.